Fantastic. So, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jason Camelio. I work in the area called Global Initiatives at Berklee, and I'm joined today by my colleague, my co-host and co-producer, Ray Soul. And we're really happy to have you all here for this session of Global Connections. This is a webinar session that is, designed in partnership with our Berklee Global Academic Partners. In this case today, it's with Dublin City University and in the program for the Bachelors of Jazz and Contemporary Music. And we're really happy to have the director here, renowned bassist, incredible bassist, educator, and composer, Ronan Guilfoyle. Ronan, thank you for collaborating with us on this session.
Thanks for having me.
And we're also super stoked to have with us a couple of our chairs from Berklee. First off is a renowned guitarist, educator, has toured the world playing with incredible artists. Most recently, if you have the chance to check it out, she's been doing this great work with Anat Cohen. And if I'm not mistaken, you all just got nominated for a Grammy, right?
The last project was nominated for a Grammy. Yeah.
So congratulations and welcome to Cheryl Bailey, our assistant chair of guitar at Berklee.
Hello, everybody. Good to see everybody here.
And another world traveler, renowned educator, multi-instrumentalist. When I hear you play, you're on the drum set. I seriously, it just sings. I've never heard a drummer that plays like you. I love your playing, and it's such a joy to have you here. Our chair of percussion at Berklee, Yaron Israel.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here, Jason. Thanks for having us. So good to share this spot with Ronan and Cheryl as well. So looking forward to this time together.
Cool. And I'm just dropping in the websites for Cheryl and Yaron, and we'll get Ronan in there. And ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't had the opportunity, you're going to want to go check out their music. You're going to want to follow them on social media. This is a great opportunity to have a conversation with them. Our session is being recorded today, so you're going to be able to go back and take a look at it later. If you miss anything, you want to go back and revisit what we share. If you have friends or colleagues that missed the session, we'll make it available online as well. And that way you can share it out to them. And, for the first part, we're going to do a few questions with our guests today, talking about their music and their approach to rhythm section playing. And then we're going to open it up to you because we really want to hear from you. We'd like to have a dialogue with you, get your questions, your insights, and really hear from you. So we'll open it up. You'll be able to unmute and chat, or you can drop your questions into the chat in Zoom if you'd like as well. So please, be ready, get those things going, those ideas that you have or questions that you have. But I'd like to start off, if each of you, and we'll start with you, Cheryl, and then Yaron and Ronan. The thing that's really interesting about, most contemporary music programs is there's a big focus on just instrumental and vocal technique. It's really working on your instrument. And in the case of guitar, bass, drum set, and percussion. And I'm just wondering, in each of your areas, what is it that you're working on, you're focusing on, whether it's through the classes that you deliver or through your methodology, your pedagogy, where you take those techniques and the focus that you're working on, and Cheryl, you kind of alluded this to bebop playing, and move it from the instrument to the practical, where they're actually using it. Can you share a little bit about what you're doing in the guitar department or what you're doing in the program from your perspective at Berklee?
Yeah. Could you re-ask the question? There were a lot of things in there.
Sure. So I think that to narrow it down, in the guitar department, a lot of the focus is on private instrument teaching and building up the skill on the instrument. How do you move it from that private lesson experience into your students playing and actually taking that skill into ensemble playing? Whether it be in labs or where do they go next from the lessons with you?
Well, yeah, I mean, we have within the guitar department we have a huge array of labs, which are really cool because the labs are really, for instance, my lab is based on something that I'm passionate about and something I've developed over a long time. So take that times 54 professors that, whether they're into, there's a pedal steel lab and there are funk labs and there are classical guitar repertoire labs. So I mean, there's really it's a really unique experience because you can get right next to a faculty member who's developed that and lived that material and has really created that uniquely for the lab. So usually the labs are maybe they're like my lab's 8 people maximum. So at least you get together with people that are in, and I have some people that are already playing and some people are rock players and they're like, wow, I want to get into this. So you have people at all levels and intensities of interest, but everyone's welcome. And so I think everybody walks away with something wherever they're coming in. But we have quite a few guitar department ensembles. So for instance, like there's a Chet Atkins ensemble, and there's different funk ensembles, a Grant Green ensemble, West Monk, so again, those are sort of projects developed by faculty who really are immersed in that music and love it. And then of course the school has, just if you just go browse through the listings, there's everything from the Indian music ensemble and on and on and on. And again, it's open to whether you're really been playing that music for a while, you're just curious, you want to check it out. But I think all of us are really, the point of, talking about practicing technique. Why do I want to practice technique? Just for bragging rights? Just to say, hey, I could put my metronome on and play this no, that wouldn't inspire me to practice every day. It's that developing technique so that when I play with others, we can take the music higher. Like getting rid of those barriers, technical barriers on your instrument is actually freedom. So I think that's where we're all coming from about this. It's not to develop technique for bragging rights or whatever. It's really when you have this command of your instrument, when you go to play with others who are also on this same path, the music that you come together to make just blossoms. So to me, that's the motivation, and I feel that's what we're all really about, not only in the guitar department, but I think the whole philosophy of the school.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Yaron, from the percussion department standpoint at Berklee, and you actually, how do you approach it with your area and with your students and faculty?
Yeah, some of what Cheryl is said echoes through our department as well. We have well, right now we're running anywhere between 40 and 60 labs, and all of our labs are geared toward actually practical application of various techniques. A few years ago, um, we actually really consciously and intentionally changed even the names of some of our labs to really accentuate the aspect of learning repertoire. So in other words, we have a funk lab, let's say, but it's not just called funk drumming, it's called funk repertoire and development. Because from a drum set standpoint, one of the big things, and I think this is an overarching idea in terms of our rhythm section clinic today, is that from a drum standpoint, I think it's really essential that students develop repertoire. The drummers that are working professionals are not the ones, they're working maybe doing clinics, but those guys who can play, 300 beats per minute, a single stroke roll, that's great. But the guys who are actually playing music and working are the ones that know the songs, no matter what style it is, whether it's jazz, whether it's funk, whether it's pop, whether it's metal. The ones that know the songs are the ones that are working. So we really try to gear our labs wherever possible. And in the drum set area, we run labs in every style, from country western to funk to rock to metal. Every style that's imaginable, we have a lab for at Berklee. The other thing too, in our other areas of percussion, we actually have specialized ensembles even within the percussion department. In our hand percussion area, we have a real popular West African drum and dance ensemble where the students are actually interacting from the standpoint of looking toward preparing for a concert. Marimba, we have marimba ensembles, we have steel pan ensembles. So those specialized areas, we have ensembles specifically where students can work on performance techniques that will enable them to actually put on performances at the end of every semester. So those are some of the things that we have in our department to move students to that level of freedom that Cheryl mentioned, where you're learning the techniques on your instruments, but you're actually applying that to a real world, practical, hands-on, performing environment.
Great. Excellent. Yeah, it's great to hear that there's so many options for the various percussion instruments as well to actually bring it to a performance space. And so Ronan, the Dublin City University is a Berklee Global academic partner. You have a Berklee track that maps to Berklee, so students that are enrolled in your program are able to transfer their credits to Berklee. So that creates a great avenue of learning, connecting our programs. Can you talk a little bit about, your programming and how you look at that, the instrumental focus, and then how you're getting students to apply those skills?
Yeah, I mean, to go back to the idea of the um, rhythm section class. First of all, obviously we're a much smaller institution than Berkeley, and it wouldn't be possible for us to hold those kind of variety of labs. But having said that, in all 4 years, the the bass players and drummers play together in the lab. They that is so that they're actually playing. Now they don't play. Every lab isn't bass and drums together. Although in fourth year it is, in the final year it is. They work the whole year together with bass and drums together. So we do that. We're very conscious of that. That a it's that the drums and bass in particular, they've got partners in crime. They're partners in crime. If you're a bass player, it's a drummer. If it's a drummer, it's a bass player. And any drummer or bass player will tell you that through their lives, there are certain people that they just love to play with, who are and there are many bass and drum teams who are hired as a unit because they have a certain way of playing together. So we're very conscious of that idea. So we introduce that from first year onwards. And the other thing is, I'm also, in jazz education, I'm always surprised at like how, relatively speaking, considering the kind of music that jazz and jazz related music is, how little rhythm study is done outside of the obvious people like drummers, for example. So when we did the curriculum for this, I insisted that we have to have a rhythm studies class that everyone has to take for all 4 years. And it's actually quite a unique thing in our program. There may be other schools that do it, but I haven't come across them yet, or somebody could correct me. But basically you have to do what's called rhythm studies for 4 years. It's mandatory and everybody has to do it. And it's basically singing and clapping for 3 years and then putting it on your instrument in the fourth year. We always say, we produce rhythmic X-Men by the end of it, but we hope that they use their powers for good rather than evil. But anyway, but the reason I say that is because I think a thing that's not talked about enough obviously teachers do talk about it, but a lot of people focus on, they ask, how does my music sound? And often you don't hear the question, how does my music feel? Which is it's quite it's a subtle thing, but it's huge. It's actually huge, because the feeling of the music, if you look at people who are not musicians, what we call them civilians, let's say civilians. So they're not in the music army. The things they respond to are much kind of bigger picture stuff than musicians respond. Musicians respond to the bigger picture stuff as well, but we tend to have a forensic view of them because it's our profession and we think about sound and technique. But people who don't, one of the first things they respond to is how music feels, how it feels. And one thing I always say to students is, ask yourself that question. Don't always ask yourself, how do I sound, or how does my music sound? Say, how does your music feel? And the question that I ask them about is like, can you imagine, like can you take yourself, like record your band and somehow try and imagine that you walked into that room and you heard that music. Now, if you heard that music, would you feel good? That's a great question to ask. Would you feel good? Not would you say, oh, that guy sounds great, or he sounds, but would you actually feel good, listening to the music? Because that's a huge part of music, is how it feels. It's not just how it sounds, it's how it feels. And I think with our subject this evening, which is rhythm sections, the rhythm section is just like, if the rhythm section sounds great, the music's almost certainly going to sound great throughout. If let's say one of the soloists is not so great, it's only going to sound not so great while that soloist is playing, and the rest of the time it'll be okay. But if the rhythm section is not happening, the music is gone. So, and the rhythm section has to take care of, I mean, everybody does, but the rhythm section particularly has to take care of how the music feels. So we decided to do this rhythm studies thing because we felt that one of the things that you got to be able to do to make the music feel good is be very precise with what you're trying to do, whatever that is. So have a control over rhythm as a sense in your body before you apply it to your instrument even. So that's why the rhythm studies of singing and clapping for 3 years, to try and get people. I know there are some students from DCU on here, and they've all been through grueling singing and clapping sessions. But we do believe that it's a really important part of training yourself as a musician is to be rhythmic, physically rhythmic, regardless of your instrument, whether you're a singer, whether you're a guitar player, whether you're a bass player, drummer. That it shouldn't be just down for the, let's say, the bass and drums, particularly, definitely the drums, and usually the bass as well. And of course, you know, other instruments, you know, and it depends on the teachers how much they focus on rhythm. But we believe that we need to take that responsibility, an overarching responsibility to all the students, to give them strong rhythmic training regardless of instrument.
Great. Yeah. Well, that actually leads us into this next question I have for Cheryl and Yaron, which is, you know, based on, you know, all the expertise and experience that you have, you know, could you share a little bit about, you know, kind of your philosophy in your approach, as you'd be working with, whether it be a guitarist or a drummer or with other instruments in a rhythm section. Do you have some tried and true approaches that you kind of tend to lean on, or specific styles and approaches that, you know, that you could share with the audience here? And, you know, some of them are students, some might be educators, but um, any insights as far as like the approaches to working with rhythm sections, to building up those skills? And, you know, Ron and Cheryl, please jump in. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead, you're on.
Well, that's a good question, and I think it really on a when you I find that, you know, I teach, as well as chair our department. I teach a class called Advanced Jazz Drumming, as well as a couple other labs, but specifically dealing with brush techniques. And but in terms of ensembles, which I have a chance to teach as well at Berklee, um, it's a situation where, particularly with rhythm sections, is to really try to get rhythm sections to understand that, you know, there's an objective part of what we do and how we function, and then there's a subjective part. In other words, the subjective part is, and that's a great thing at Berklee too, that students get a chance to interact with various teachers throughout their 4 years at Berklee. If they take an ensemble every semester, they might have, you know, various teachers playing various instruments, and they'll get a chance to get feedback. I think that's critical, that they get feedback from other instrumentalists outside of their instrument, because in the real world, that those are the profiles that are hiring you. So from my standpoint, when I'm teaching, you know, I always keep that in mind, that, you know, I might have a saxophonist in a group, a pianist in a group, but I feel that it's important for me to really communicate to them what do I look for as a drummer? What am I hearing? You know, what do I want to hear from the bass player? How do I want our connection to be? What do I want to hear? So I try to really approach it from that standpoint. Even with horn players, Ronan mentioned a great point. A lot of times horn players feel disengaged with the rhythm part of what's going on. So one of the things that I like to do is avoid horn players sitting around too much. They play their solo, then they expect, oh, I'll just hang out. But no, I really try to get horn players, guitarists, everybody involved, you know, rhythmically to participate. So that's a big thing. And then, as I mentioned before, a big thing with me is learning repertoire, and learning repertoire very quickly, because in the real world, you know, someone may send you a list of 15 songs and, okay, the gig is tomorrow. You know, what are you going to do? So there's some true and tried techniques that I've kind of developed in terms of, okay, take these steps to learning repertoire. So those are kind of a couple highlights that I like to, bring to the ensemble um, experience with my students.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Cheryl, what are your thoughts? What's your take on this?
Yeah, well, a couple things. I know, you know, Ronan was talking about feel. And this is really one place that you can't fake it. You can't fake it. But that also doesn't mean if you don't feel it that you can't learn about it. And you know what I mean? So that's the good news. But you can't fake it. So one of the important things for me and my students, well, actually, and to connect with Yaron, I always say we have to be great drummers. You know, it doesn't matter what instrument you play. So if you think of your instrument as a drum with pitches, start to think that way about your instrument, and then it makes you concentrate on how and where you place things, which is really important, right? And also, in terms of this thing about feel, you know, for me, it's really starting with the heartbeat and the pulse. And, you know, everybody can say, well, yeah, I understand a quarter note, or you might even, any kind of rhythmic phrase, you know, whether it's a comping pattern or it's a melody, you know, you can say, well, I understand that intellectually, but the next step is, yeah, but do you feel it, right? So there's two different things, and it's, to me, that taking that care and really considering rhythm in all you do, and also feel in all you do, because if you play funk, it's got to be funky. If you're swinging, it's got to swing, you know what I mean? And so sometimes those are not the most concrete concepts for students to get. And you know, for instance, you know, we all know incredible classical players. I know some of my friends in New York. You could give them the Charlie Parker Omni book, and they could probably sight read it at tempo. But unless they've really listened to a lot of jazz or played jazz, it's not going to swing. So on that level, it's correct, but it ain't right. Yeah. But I think these are also things that we learn about playing with others, and just trying to play with as many people as you can, and also listening to a lot, and starting to even just open your mind to these concepts, and they'll lead you towards developing, you know, all of these things that we're talking about that are really important to a great rhythm section player. And last thing I would say is listening. To me, as a rhythm section player, my job is to make the soloist sound great. So really developing great skills as a comper. You'll get more gigs from that than being a blazing soloist, because, you know, you're going to go out and do a gig and the leader's going to say, hey, I like that. That feels good to me. What are you doing next week?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Well, that's interesting. You know, kind of to this next point, I guess the idea is, you know, we're all kind of in a really funky position right now because it's hard to get together and play with, you know, with one another. Then, you know, we're, and a lot of people, as I talk to different colleagues and artists who've been sequestered away, they kind of feel like their chops with playing with other musicians live and working on those rhythm section skills and capacities are kind of, I was talking to Walter Smith recently, and he's just like, I have been practicing a lot. Technically, I feel better, but I'm really worried about the next time I actually play with a live group.
Mm-hmm.
So to that point, I guess, is there, you know, do you have any insights of how all of you are approaching, you know, this sort of COVID situation where, you know, what happens when you're away from other live musicians? How do you keep your rhythm section playing chops together? What are some approaches that each of you are using?
Yeah, I think, you know, to echo Cheryl there, you know, this whole thing of listening and really listening on a really deep level is something that you can even continue to engage in, you know, even in our COVID environment, you know, because I always feel, just to kind of uh, piggyback a little bit on our previous conversation, I always feel, and I always try to bring home the point to my students, that the more you learn as a rhythm section player, especially, or even just limit if you limit things just to a drummer, the more you know about the other instruments, the history of the other instruments, the difficulties of other instruments, you know, the limitations of other instruments. The more you know about what the other people are doing in the ensemble, the better ultimately you're going to be able to play with those those various instrumentalists, you know, whether it's a piano player, knowing, understanding, you know, what some of the limitations of a piano player, you know, how, you know, if I'm playing very loud, can a piano player really be comfortable in that kind of environment? You know, can a singer really be really truly comfortable no matter how great my what I'm playing is, you know? So those are kind of things. So I think those kind of concepts, even in this COVID situation, you can think about, of course, maybe you can't do it, but you can also think about it. So I think you can start to like refine certain ensemble based concepts, certain rhythm section concepts. The other thing too is making the metronome your friend. I mean, that might be controversial. Some people are like, no, I don't know. It limits me. It puts me in a box. But let me tell you, in most musical environments these days, contemporary music environments, you're playing with a click. You know, as we were talking earlier, I'm a music director at a church, and all of our playing is with a click. You know, the singers as well as the instrumentalists. So if you can't make that click groove, then you know, next person. So you know, really spending time working in that kind of environment in this COVID, while we're in this COVID, you know, really fine tuning that. And a lot of times I'll put on a click when I'm working with an ensemble. I'll put the click on 2 and 4 and have the band. I'm like, okay, if we're 4 people in the band, welcome our 5th member, which is this click on, and expect them to still make things feel, still have a loose sense, still play with dynamics, and go from there. But so those are some things you can do. It's tough though. It's really tough. I miss playing with people so much, but really tough.
This is great insight. Ronan, Cheryl, your thoughts on, you know, some approaches you've been taking?
Well, just to actually to kind of tie in with what both Cheryl and Joran said, I think one of the issues, and I think it's a great point that you can, like, deep listening is a great thing, but I also think that's a great way to improve your rhythm section playing, is to listen to what great rhythm sections do. And this brings us to this thing that also connects to what Cheryl said about playing with people. What I think, when people are learning, especially young people, it's very hard to get away from the idea of the me into the idea of the us. And, you know, because you become so focused on learning your instrument and what your progress and all that, that it takes a long time to, and I think older musicians appreciate this a bit more, the power of the collective is something that's not maybe as understood as it could be. Because the power of the collective is the ultimate power in music. It's the power of what the band does, not what one person in the band does. Having said that, how one person in the band feeds into that collective can have a gigantic effect on the feel and everything of the band. So the understanding of not you know, again, to come away from this thing, not what I'm doing and how I sound and all that, but how is what I'm doing affecting the music? And that way of thinking is incredibly powerful. And great rhythm sections do this. They have a collective power that is beyond the playing of them individually, as great as they may be. You know, if you take Elvin Jones, McCoy Tyner, and Jimmy Garrison, all of those guys are among the greatest players of their instrument in the 20th century, never mind jazz or anything like that, right? They're among the greatest. When those 3 guys played together with Coltrane, there's a collective power to that is beyond any one of them individually. It's the way it's what they contributed to the music. The same thing with, you know, Herbie Hancock, Ron Carter, Tony Williams. It's totally different way of playing. You know, Wynton Kelly, Jimmy Cobb, Paul Chambers, Philly Joe, Red Garland, Paul Chambers. You know, the way Ahmad Jamal's trio played, you know, and also in other related musics, the way a rhythm section will play with, say, James Brown, or a rhythm section will play in Brazilian music or whatever. It is a collective power that is required to make that music be as great as it is. And the understanding of that of your place within that power, are how you know, the kind of things you need to understand when you're listening to great players do it, to identify those things that are, you know, the way that guy is playing that is what's making that so great. It's not actually necessarily even what he's playing or she. You know, they're playing a G. You know, you get someone like Bootsy Collins, right? You know, he'll play an A, and make 2,000 people do this with the way he plays that A. You know, that's kind of the way he plays it is as important as what he's playing. It's a thing, actually, if you talk to classical musicians, to go back a little bit to what Cheryl was saying, it's a thing that classical musicians don't really understand about jazz a lot of the time, that where we will say, look, it's not about what they're playing, it's the way they're playing it. And that seems like that's a head wrecker for a lot of classical musicians. No, it must be about, it has to be about the note. No, it's about the way they play that note. It makes it incredible. So the way that a group plays together, bass, drums, and the comping instrument, whether that's piano or guitar or piano and guitar, the way they play together, the collective power of that, to understand that is to make a huge stride forward in your own playing, I think.
This is going deep. So it's this philosophical yet critically important technique that you have to overcome, and it is maybe a musical maturity thing or an experience thing that ends up happening there. Cheryl,
Well,
did you want to?
sorry to interrupt. I think that doesn't in any way sideline the technique necessary to be able to do that. Because once you make a decision that you're going to have an input into that collective power, you need the tools to do it with. So
Right.
it's no use saying I'm going to have a collective input when you can't play 4 beats in a row without dropping 3 of them. So really, I think what it does is it makes sense of the practice.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So the technical aspects, which we all need to learn and which we need our teachers to show us, we need to also have if we understand the context within which they work, it actually makes practicing easier, because you actually know why you're doing it. That it's like a bigger thing, not just because my teacher will, give me a hard time next week if I don't know it, which is a good enough reason to do your practice. Thank you very much. But having said that, it should also be for you.
Take your medicine.
It should also be for you. Not just to make sure you get out of there alive when you go in next week.
Yeah. Well, actually, Cheryl, did you want to add on to that?
Well, there were a couple things there that was really cool to think about, but because your question was, how in this time, we're not really able to play together. How do you develop that? And I've actually found this to be my challenge that I will face and be victorious over. Is I spend more time playing with tracks and even making tracks to play with, and that can be helpful for practice. But sometimes you meet people and you can tell all they do is play with Ebersolds because they don't listen. Like there's a certain point where you just turn off. If you're playing with the same track over and over, and everything's in the same place all the time. So in a way, it can create negative habits in that way. So my challenge has really been, because I guess that's the thing I always say, is like, you're listening to it, but it's not listening to you. And that's the amazing thing when you play with, I'm playing with you guys, and you play a note and the drummer just says, yeah, I heard that. Or, there's a note underneath you that says, yeah, I heard that. And so anyway, I guess my challenge has been to keep that focus, like the Zen Buddhist, on fire. to use that time to really pay attention to my phrasing and not just go on automatic pilot. And it is a challenge, but I feel that when we get out of this, which there is a light at the end of the tunnel, that's the skill that's going to be really honed in for me. So it's a hard one though, because you catch yourself and you're like, oh wait, I'm just playing through my stuff,
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I think this time too, we really, because I think as rhythm section players, we come to the table, or as to be successful as rhythm section players, we should come to the table with a kind of selfless kind of mentality. Even and if you don't like that word, at least being flexible as possible, because every situation, I mean, I've played with some of everybody from great vocalists, Abby Lincoln and Dakota Staten, to Sonny Rollins and the gamut and everything else in between, various styles. And even though you have a certain, as we were talking about before, you kind of have a certain list of objectives, but every situation requires you to turn those objectives in different ways. What worked for one situation does not work for another situation. You know, there's always these nuances that are involved. So I think this time of being quarantined, so to speak, I think one of the things that we can work on is our humanity, you know, whatever that means to you, your spirituality, so that you can, when we do get out of this, you will be able to maybe come to those situations with a more open mind, maybe with a more open heart, maybe with a less ego, if you will, and those kind of things, with a certain, maybe another level of humbleness. And so those kind of things, because I think that's very important to be really successful as a rhythm section player. You know, we have to, it's kind of like, you know, I like football. It's kind of like a cornerback. You're going to get, those that follow football or like football, you are going to get beat sometimes, but it's how you come back, you know, and face that situation, you know. So that's something I think that can't be said enough too, is that we all should spend this time, you know, working on those kind of things, those kind of internal things that make us who we are.
This is really great to hear, because it is interesting, you know, just in a broader sense of this discussion about music, that all of us who live and thrive on the opportunity to get into a musical situation, to enjoy that camaraderie and create that experience, to have it taken away. You know, this is very interesting. And so it makes it so that when we are able to be together to play, maybe to retune ourselves into what the opportunity is, and how, you know, not to take it for granted, and therefore to be, you know, selfless and in service of the music. That's really cool to hear. There's a technical question here from Gary in the chat. And ladies and gentlemen, we're going to kind of move into Q&A. So if you have questions, feel free to drop them into the chat, or as we go through, you can feel free to raise your Simpsons Caucasian looking Zoom hand, and we'll pick you, and you can unmute and ask a question. But Gary's asking a question about using the metronome with the audible click or the visible settings and the swing lights and all of that. Is there, you know, when you all are using a metronome in your either your practice for yourselves or with your students, do you have some techniques or preferences on how you employ that?
Ooh, pick me, pick me, pick
Go ahead,
me.
Cheryl. Here you go.
I'm a metronome fanatic. I love also the, you know, the digital ones. You can take them down to almost nothing. Love that. My biggest advice on that is, well, let's put it this way. When I was a student at Berklee, I had a corner of my room with smashed metronomes, or I would just get so frustrated, I would smash them against the wall, because I was treating the metronome as something that was telling me that I suck. And you know what? I did, and I still do. But I learned how to work with a metronome. And instead of thinking of it something that's torturing you or abusing you or telling you that you suck, look at it as your best friend, and actually take the next step and visualize it as your favorite drummer, whoever that is. So I like to think it's Jimmy Cobb. I love Jimmy Cobb. So I might imagine you can use the metronome in any place that you like in the beat cycle. And I recommend experimenting with all kinds of things. But if I'm playing, you know, something swinging, and I might imagine, you know, think that's 2 and 4, 3, 4, 1. But anyway, I'm going to close my eyes and just hang out with that for a little bit and really imagine that's Jimmy Cobb. Now, if Jimmy Cobb was in the room, or a great drummer that I want to play with, that's going to elevate my devotion to playing with it. Instead of being like, oh yeah, that's just some clicking at me, something that's annoying me, I interact with it as another musician. Because I also think that's a bigger step towards when you play music, that you get in the habit of being outside of just in here. So that's one step in a way you're developing that. But then it's fun. It's fun for me to play with my favorite drummer. And so now I have no more broken metronomes in my apartment. And I'm still always working on it. So that's what I mean, like when I think I'll always still be working on deepening my relationship to the time and the feel forever, because there's so many layers in that you can get into. So anyway, I think the first thing is to really interact with the metronome like it's your best friend. It's the world's perfect, I mean, in terms of technically perfect time drummer, and work on making it swing, as Joran said that. You got to make that metronome swing. You add the swing. And then that ultimately, that's what you bring with you. That's your strength as a player. You come into a situation, that's what you're bringing. You're not relying on anybody, because that's a load of BS. I rely on the drummer, the bass player to give me the time. No, you have to bring the time. And then, you know, when you get with great players like Joran or Ronan, you know, like, okay, they've all developed their time. So when we get together, now, again, it's sort of like we open up new layers of freedom and communication because we're all bringing this to the playing situation.
Cool. Very cool. And Joran, you were going to jump in here as well, yeah.
Yeah, you know, Gary's question is pretty interesting in terms of, you know, the click or the light, let's say. But I just to echo what Cheryl says, you know, I always tell my students that metronome is your duet partner. If you're practicing by yourself, that's your duet partner. Kind of think of it like that. And now metronomes, you know, you can actually have different sounds, whether it be a cowbell, whether it be a clicked sound. You know, you have so many options now. And also playing with you know, tracks too that have evolved out of that, you know, like bass lines and things like that are great. But in terms of Gary's question of audible click versus light, I think out of habit or from a practical standpoint, you should probably practice mostly with the audible because that's what you're going to experience 9 times out of 10. But the light is kind of interesting. And I know as a drummer, sometimes it provides me another challenge when I actually try to play with the light, you know, and the light is kind of akin to actually watching, let's say, a conductor. If you play in a situation, whether it be a theater job or in an orchestra or in a concert band or something like that, where you have to keep your eye on something, I think that's a good way of practicing that.
Yeah, I think I could maybe even beat Cheryl in terms of being a maniac with metronomes. I love metronomes. I mean, I really do. In fact, I have 4 of them on here, right? And because all of them do slightly different things. So, and actually just before we came on, I was practicing this, you know. So this is a really simple little metronome called the odd metronome, and it's very cool. You literally can set up any kind of clave you want just by pressing, you know, any of these note values. And so I was practicing in 7. I just set that up, and I was playing that for about 20 minutes before we came on air, after a day's teaching. So it was really nice just to have fun playing with the metronome. I love playing with metronomes. I would absolutely agree with Cheryl. I love playing with them. I love practicing with them. And I've got, as I said, I've got 4 different ones there because they all do slightly different things. There's one one metronome where it removes the metronome at random while you're playing and then brings it back in, that kind of stuff. So the advance in the technology with metronomes now is incredible. I mean, the stuff you can do with them, and it's so you can have so much creative fun with them. I think it keeps you in time, helps you work in time, but it also can be really creative the way you use them. You know, you can try something like, you know, have the metronome. We're used to playing it on 2 and 4, but what about having the metronome on the and of 1 and 3? You know, those kind of things. You can do a lot of those things. And regarding the light one, I don't do it myself, but I was lucky enough to spend a few years playing with the late great Keith Copeland, and I once saw him do a demonstration of Wilcoxon with the metronome. And it was just a regular metronome with the light, and he put it on, and then he's reading the Wilcox, and he just started playing. Of course, as soon as he started playing, you couldn't hear the metronome anymore, but you could see that light, and it never moved. He was able to. It was kind of frightening, actually, because he really played loud too. It was really loud, and he was putting the Wilcox and stuff across the drum set, and he's reading like this, and all we can see is this red light, and it didn't move. So yeah, I mean, I know people who use it, but I don't use it myself. But yeah, I think that actually I never really thought about that thing that Joran said about conductor. That's a great point, actually. Yeah, if you're if you're playing in an orchestra, you do have to watch somebody who's giving you the time, or giving you at least where they think the time is. Let's be diplomatic.
Politically correct. I like
Very
that.
good. So I know, Cheryl, we're getting close to the top of the hour here, and you might have to drop off. So in case you do have to jump to go and meet with your bebop ensemble, thank you so much for being with us today. Right now, I'm going to go over and turn it over to Andrew Murphy. You have get your hand up there. Feel free to unmute and ask away, sir.
Sure, yeah. Mine, Yaron actually mentioned it at the start, and I just wondered, did anyone have advice on this? What is your advice or your steps for building repertoire and for getting into new tunes?
Well, I think for me, you know, as I mentioned, I teach some steps to actually develop this. And one of the first steps is to actually listen to a reliable version. Now, when I say reliable, I mean, it's specifically if you're talking jazz, in many cases, the composers of the songs were actually also the performers. So, you know, if you're learning something like St. Thomas, let's just say, you know, you should first go to Sonny Rollins' version of it. Now, there's been many recordings after that, and that's great. But it always helps to go to the definitive version of these songs, whatever it is. If you're learning a Journey song, whatever the style is, you know, you're learning a James Brown song, go to the original recording first, and then from there, be able to sing the melody. Be able to at least sing the melody, know the form. So those are some early steps to take. After taking those steps, then I believe, and again, this is not everybody agrees with this, but I believe in playing along with records. I grew up playing with records. And so I believe in playing with the records because it's nothing like having an opportunity, you know, you're learning St. Thomas, and even if you're a non-drummer and you get a chance to play with Kenny Clark behind you, or play with Max Roach behind you, you know, to really assimilate that feeling. There's you know, Max Roach is no longer here, so if you want to have an opportunity to play with Max Roach, that's your time to do it. So I believe in playing along with the records, and then from that stand, once you feel really confident at those steps, then be able to sing and accompany yourself. And I always say, if I was standing outside a room and you were playing St. Thomas, let's say, I should be able to hear, as a drummer, I should be able to hear, oh, he's playing St. Thomas. He's not playing Caravan, or he's not playing something else, but he's playing that song. So really being able to accompany yourself, and then to be able to accompany yourself without the recording, just independently. And then also sitting at a melodic harmonic instrument is also a part of that process. So you know the harmonic movement. How is the bass player moving? Because that will actually give you cues as to the form of the song and how to support the form of the song. And then from there, one of the things, every drummer that's on this call, I want to empower you guys to be leaders, because there's certain things that you learn as a leader that's going to inform you as an accompanist. You know, how did it make you feel when the bass player was late? So then that can inform you about the importance of being on time. How did it feel when your horn player came to the rehearsal and they didn't know the song? Well, that informs you as the drummer, you know, what people might think of you if you come to a rehearsal unprepared. So I say that to say, in developing the steps to developing repertoire, you should actually play whatever song you're working on. Now it's hard to do, but you should look to play that in real time, where now everybody's depending on you. You know, you should look. So what that means is that sometimes when you're jamming with people, as the drummer, raise your hand and say, let's play A. Don't let always be the one that everybody else is calling the songs, you know, because it's nothing like that. It's one thing to play with the recording, but it's another thing to actually play the song where you are the drummer and everybody's depending on you. So that's kind of a condensed way of looking at that, and some ways of developing your repertoire.
Yeah, Ronan, that's fantastic. I mean, you're on. That's fantastic, and I love the idea of that. That confidence building, that musical independence is, come prepared. Don't be expected to be carried, but be prepared to carry. That's really cool. Ronan, there's a question in the chat from David about interested in your ideas about clapping and singing chorus. Is this sulcatu? Any ideas for study in the clapping and singing method?
Well, Sulcatu, what he's talking about, Sulcatu, for those who don't know, that's the Indian syllabic system, the Ta, Di, Kena, Dum, that stuff. We do use that, but you don't even have to know that to do really valuable practice of singing and clapping. And all it is singing a song and clapping something. That's all it is. And so, but of course, the wonderful thing about that is that it is completely self-contained. You're not playing an instrument, it's contained within your body. So there are, some of our students are on here, so they'll have been through this thing, but something really basic. You can start with really basic, sing a song and clap something. So an obvious thing, depending on the feel, you could clap on 2 and 4, or you could clap something very simple. And if that's okay, then you can move on to different things. So for example, in first year, we used the most basic song of all, like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, because it's all quarter notes, right? So ba, 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 etc. Right? So let's say you, and real simple. So bum, 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 boom, right? So no problem, go through that. Then start practicing putting that clap in a different part. So if I do it a bit slower, boom, 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 and I go boom, 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 boom. So I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's like twice the speed. Or I might go, slower, but boom, boom, and triples, which is a second triplet, which is different to a second 16th, which is tikung, tikung, tikung. So can you sing that and separate those differences? Boom, 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 and the triplet, boom, 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 boom. These are tiny little gradations. This is wonderful practice. You can practice that with a metronome, keeping you honest in terms of the tempo. You can keep that going like that. And then you can do things like we do practice things where you're clapping beyond or in a different cycle to the one that you're. So, if I was going boom, 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 and I was to clap a 7-beat cycle, boom, 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 boom. Or if I was to clap a 5-beat cycle, boom, 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 or a 6-beat cycle, boom, 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 boom. It just goes on and on. You can pick little, you could write out a little clave, you could clap a clave and sing it. You could go into more, once you're very comfortable with all those kind of something as simple as Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, you could go into more jazz oriented, like bo 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 bo. So I'm clapping again in 1, 2, 3, but I'm singing in 4. So I could be in again. You could do this having bo 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 bo. So clapping in 7, singing in 8. So there's just so much stuff you can do, and it's all valuable because what you're doing when you do first of all, when you're doing the things, you're singing one thing, you're clapping. So what are you doing? You're building up a system of rhythmic relationships in your body. So you can hear 2 things at the same time. I mean, I think drummers get much closer to this than most other instrumentalists because of the nature of the instrument, that things are all interrelated. And I think for us non-drummers, this is such a great practice to do because you are working on what drummers call independence. But I tend to think of it as interdependence. So everything depends on each other and how they relate to each other. So that's what I recommend. Find a tune, find some stuff to clap and practice it. It's really great practice. It's not very complicated. You don't need any equipment at all. It's cheap, and it's of tremendous benefit over a long period of time.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I like that, Ronan, too, just because we're always talking as drummers, develop your inner clock, develop your inner clock. Those are great ways that we can do that, when we're riding on a train or, almost in our car, but, we can imagine it. Don't take your hands off the steering wheel. But
Wow. We have time, I think, for one more question today before we break, because we're at the top of the hour and it is the end of the term. And I know that Ronan and Yaron probably have students that they've got to connect with here. Any last questions from our audience? One more question about rhythm section from anybody
I
here.
kind
Emily,
of
you
have
got one?
one, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
It was kind of for Cheryl, but I'll ask it anyway. But like when I started comping, or when I started doing jazz, one of the things I struggled most with was like comping. So all the advice then for ages that I was given was, follow the soloist and respond to them. But then it was sort of last year, I had a drummer kind of teaching me for the first time. And he was like, no, you have to lock in with whatever the drummer does with the snare. And I was kind of like, that's new. So I was just sort of wondering, like, which do rhythm section generally prefer, like kind of following the solo or like locking in with you?
That's
Well, what about both?
All, yeah,
Yeah.
all of the above.
Yeah.
I think though, one of the things with comping is always a difficult thing to teach pianists and guitarists. But I think to understand, because really what you said, both happen, plus other things, But so I think having kind of an underlining concept of what's the purpose of comping. What are you actually trying to accomplish? And so I think as rhythm section players in general, we can always think of some terms like complement, complete, compel, confirm, even to carry, I think if you have that concept, then you can go in between, So what does that technically look like? Sometimes it might look technically like you playing in unison with the left hand of the drummer. Other times it may look like you actually playing contrary to what the left hand of the drummer is doing. So that way you're not locked into one thing. Then other times it may look like, okay, playing with the soloist, because it's really all of the above and even all of that happening at one time. So I think, having those kind of terms, kind of global terms will kind of help you overall.
Yeah, if I could say something, Emily, I think if you think of it exactly like a good listener in a conversation, it works really well, because a good listener will listen to what the other person is saying, will make responses that are, relative that are relevant to what the person is saying, and then every now and again we'll throw something in that maybe moves the conversation slightly. So you're listening and you're going, right, yeah, okay, yeah, really. But do you not think, and you say something, it's like when you say, but what about that? That's when you might play a chord that's like a substitute chord or something like that, or you play some rhythmic thing that's different. That's the thing where the soloist then is I heard a great expression for this once. A good comper should be able to listen and deal some cards at the same time. Dealing cards is a great way to think about that. Do you deal any cards in your comping? Every now and again you take a card and you throw it on the table and say, well, what about this? And as well as then, but the other times you're listening and you're responding to what you're hearing. So I think that, it's a combination of a whole lot of things. And I think the analogy of being a listener in a conversation, a good listener is someone who not only listens to what you're saying, but actually interjects things and suggests things and makes comments and maybe expresses surprise or maybe expresses, humor, or, all the things that we do when we're having a good conversation and when we're with people. And who those people are, who the people are that you like to talk to, that are fun to talk to, precisely because that they interact with you and they give you, they allow your conversation to develop precisely because of the way they listen to you. The people who are there going, oh yeah, right, yeah, okay, really, yeah, okay. They're making all the noises of listening, but they're not actually listening, and they're not listening. They're just doing the yeah. And those people as well. That they're rigidly bored with everything you're saying, and they can't wait to start talking themselves. So that's not good comping. That's comping because it says B flat 7 on the page. I play B flat 7, so therefore I'm comping. That's that kind of thing. So I think the best analogy for this is, in my opinion, is the conversational one. The great comper is like a great listener in a conversation. They listen, they respond, and they react, and they provoke sometimes. Sometimes they provoke. And all of those things work. It's just finding that, and the best guys do it, you know, the best people do it. I always think of someone like Herbie Hancock, you know, is maybe, you know, arguably he's definitely one of the greatest compers of all time. And, you know, I've had many a cafe discussion about maybe the greatest comper, you know. So because of his ability to use color and to groove and to provoke and to, you know, he's just this unbelievable comper, you know, just because of the sheer variety of conversational things that he's able to put into any piece of music, you know.
Yeah. And just on that note too, the use of space too. Don't feel compelled to always be playing. That's a really and that ties in really with having a good conversation.
Yeah, it's funny, and there's one C I think that needs to be added here, because I think to your point, Ronan, about Herbie Hancock, and this is it's composition.
Yeah.
It's comping is it's like it is, you know, improvisation in playing in any form. I think is recomposing and composing in real time, and having that mind is makes it even more fun, more engaging, and not so humdrumming, just kind of like going through the motions. If you're approaching it as this is new music every time you're playing it, it can breathe new life into that experience as well. So this has been awesome. um I know I wish we had more time today, but we've all got to get on with the next thing. I truly appreciate Yaron, you taking time to be with us, and Ronan, and special thanks to Cheryl Bailey. And I see a few familiar faces here. I just want to give shout outs to Jordan Perlson. Thank you for joining us. David O'Rourke, it's great to see you here. One of our friends from Italy is here as well, or Cormac O'Brien is here as well from DCU. And David Locasio, hey man, it's great to see you here in the Zoom as well. So ladies and gentlemen, we look forward to seeing you in the next session. I'm just going to put something here in the chat in case you haven't seen this. Please go to linktr.ee. Link. Hold on, I can type. /BerkleeGlobal. This is where Ray and I post our global connection sessions. We got one tomorrow with our partners in Athens, Greece, the Nakas Conservatory. You're welcome to join us for that one. Vocalist Cindy Scott's going to be with us. And you know, we have more of these sessions coming up, and we'll share this one online as well for you to go back and check out. It is recorded, and you can go back and dig into all the words of wisdom, the and the guidance that these amazing artist educators have shared with us today. For now, please stay healthy, stay safe, keep staying creative and connected, and we'll see you at the next Global Connections session. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Ray.
Thank you, Ron.
Yeah, thanks, Yaron. Thanks for all the great stuff, and thanks for setting it up, Jason. And
no, this is awesome.
Thanks a lot.
Super cool. Be well.
Be well.